All right, hey, it's the Good Advice Show. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. I appreciate you tuning in today. And whatever you're doing today, wherever you are, whatever's going on with you in your business, I wish you well today. I hope that things are on the up and up for you. I'm excited for today's show. Excited to talk about something that I'm passionate about. We're going to be digging into the world of management. Before we do that, though, I'll introduce myself. My name's Blake Benz. I run the podcast. I also run a business called Good Advice that helps businesses grow and scale. We've been running the podcast for a little over 4 years now. Kind of exciting. And for you guys who are Captain Consistency, you've been checking out the podcast long term, thank you. I was going to make a joke like, what's wrong with you? Why have you stuck with me for this long? But no, seriously, thank you. Thank you for checking out the podcast. Thank you for continuing to support the podcast. I really do appreciate it. And if you're new to the podcast, this is the place where you can get your actionable, practical advice for your business. We cut through all the fluff, all the noise, take away all the sheen and shine of business that you often see on social media, and we just talk about how things work in the business world. We're going to be getting into, like I mentioned, the world of management, including a headline where Activision-Blizzard has just fired their lead developer for one of their video games. All that and more is on the show today, but before we get into it, we have a word from a business that we want you to know about, an awesome business talked about here on the show. Check out this ad coming up to you right now. Hey, have you been thinking about your health insurance plan for this next year? Maybe you just jumped into the world of entrepreneurship and you're thinking, geez, is it possible to have a good insurance plan if I'm no longer working for a business? Maybe you're even running a business and you're thinking about what does it look like to have an affordable group plan for your employees? Well, I want to tell you about Optimum Health Insurance. This is a customized healthcare plan for you and your family, and since 2018, they've been helping people get awesome, affordable healthcare coverage for really nothing at all. It's easy, it's hassle-free, and frankly, they're different from the big insurance companies that you might talk to. And crazy enough, you might even be paying less than what you've paid at a previous job when you were on some company health insurance plan. If you want to find out more and save money on your health insurance, you absolutely need to go check out OptimumHealthInsurancePlan.com. That's OptimumHealthInsurancePlan.com. That's today's sponsor. Enjoy this episode. So in the news yesterday, this broke actually last night, there was a headline coming from Bloomberg that basically said that Brian Birmingham, the lead designer on the video game World of Warcraft Classic, was terminated after he refused to give one of his employees a lower ranking. This was a pretty interesting headline for me, mostly because this is the same company, by the way, that was in headlines several months ago for doing some pretty awful stuff. Now, to give you a little bit of background, a little bit of context, Activision-Blizzard is the company that produces video games like Call of Duty, which you've probably heard of, Candy Crush, which I remember I was doing a team event and there was an employee who I guess didn't care much about what I was saying. I probably wasn't saying that interesting. And he was playing Candy Crush the whole time. So they make Call of Duty, they make Candy Crush, and they make World of Warcraft, among several other games as well. They're a massive corporation. Probably the most similar analogy I can make to another game company that you may have heard of, maybe something like Ubisoft or EA Games, which makes Madden or FIFA or other games like that. So Activision-Blizzard fires their lead developer. And I mentioned this isn't the first time they've been in the news. Now, we're going to get into this story. Let me give you first a little bit of context about Activision-Blizzard. This company's been around for 20 plus years. They've made a multitude of games over those years. Well, sometime, and I apologize, the date is a little off for me. I think it was sometime last year, or maybe actually it was, now that I think of it, it was probably about 2 or 3 years ago. They were caught in a massive sexual assault scandal. Essentially what happened was it was revealed that in a multitude of sources that they were being investigated by the state of California for some offenses against their female employees. Now, it actually gets significantly worse from here. One of the things that came out from this was that the employees that were part of this business would often play video games and get drunk rather than actually doing their jobs. In addition to this, they would set up things called cube crawls, which just sounds pretty odd. They would set up these things called cube crawls where they would essentially crawl through cubicles, notably around female employees' desks, in as creepy and weird fashion as you can imagine. Now, some of the lead people on the Activision World of Warcraft team, which is specifically what we've been talking about, I think the headline was something like they even had something called the Cosby Suite, which didn't age well. There was one senior employee who would often, frankly, prey on women within the business, to the point where he was eventually ousted from the business, and all mentions of him, all nods of adoration within the games, such as naming like a character after him, were eventually changed. Now, on top of all of this, Blizzard has also been in the news for poor pay, poor employment practices, and they have seen a massive talent churn in the last few years, including seeing their CEO resign and move on. Now, when this sexual assault scandal, the sexual, I honestly don't know how to describe it. When this whole thing broke, the new CEO ended up being ousted. There also was a reveal of I think it was at least a civil suit against Activision-Blizzard because one of the employees was so badly bullied and humiliated that she eventually killed herself. And what basically happened with that employee was supposedly she had dated another employee who maybe was her boss or a senior person, and he had taken pictures of her, and then at company parties he was passing around these naked photos of this employee. All that to say, was so badly bullied, she eventually killed herself. So some pretty awful, despicable stuff, even really creepy, bizarre stuff that things like employees stealing other employees' breast milk as like pranks. Probably already, if you're not in the know on any of this stuff, I've probably already said so much stuff that you're like, what the heck is this business? What the heck's going on? And unfortunately, this is when you have a business that is massive and is ultimately entrenched with bad leadership. Now, I will say that this having been a couple of years ago, there was some hope that things would change for Activision-Blizzard. They actually are in the process of getting bought out by Microsoft. So all that to say, there was hope that things would be different. Unfortunately, that seems to not be the case. So let's talk the specifics of this news story, and then I want to dive into what's the takeaway for you as a manager of people, as a leader, what have you. There are some very clear what not to do things in this. So essentially what happened is Activision Blizzard, across their whole business, they do something called a stacked ranking system. And I'm not clear if they themselves call it a stacking system or a ranking system, but at the end of the day, it's a ranking system. And the way it works is if you have 100 employees, all employees get ranked into buckets. And for simplicity, we can call them like stars: 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star. But if you work in corporate America, you're probably familiar with these things, where typically you get like kind of this generic HR term like highly effective or somewhat effective or improving or developing or needs improvement. There's all sorts of things that you can get classified as. Now, if you've worked in a small business, you know that whatever kind of category you get put into, it's usually a little bit more authentic than in a corporation. If you're ever in one of those lower buckets, you're pretty much done. And those of you who have worked in these kind of corporate environments, you know that when you get put on something called like an improvement plan, this usually means you're probably getting fired. In fact, I remember when I worked for the Houston Independent School District, getting on an improvement plan absolutely meant that you were at risk of being reassigned, and certainly your contract would not be renewed at the end of the year. And I even remember going to another business where there was like, and I'll just say like for the sake of things, it was like my sales acumen. My boss was like, "Hey, we're going to put together an improvement plan for you." And I was like PTSD triggered thinking, "Hey," and actually I told her, I said, "Hey, if I'm not doing a good job, like I want to know about it." And she was like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And I was like, "Well, you're putting me on this improvement plan." And she was like, well, no, an improvement plan, everyone's on an improvement plan because we can all grow. And it totally was like a frame shift for me because I was like, oh, like I always, I just kind of associated this with like, I'm getting fired because that's how many businesses treat it. Well, in the case of Activision-Blizzard, this isn't much different in that they do a profit sharing system where the employees who are at the bottom don't get the profits that those at the top get. And are most notably likely affected in terms of their future employment and certainly the promotions that are available to them when it comes to their career path. Now, you may be listening to this thinking like, okay, well, I mean, this system makes sense, right? I mean, on paper, it makes sense. Like, surely you're going to have people who are great and people who aren't great. And I would tell you that actually in reality, that's not normally the case. It's not to say that you don't always have that you don't always have a team member who's just awful. I think we can all think of, businesses we worked with where there was that one person who you were just like, man, what are you doing here? Like, you don't do anything. That happens, but it's the exception, not the norm. What this is intended to do is it's intended to foster a spirit of competition where everyone's trying to progress, everyone's trying to advance, and ultimately it lifts the business overall. What actually happens is it creates backstabbing, it creates strife, and it harms collaboration on teams. Here's why. Let's say you and I we both know that there's only 3 spots for the people who can fit at the top. Because this is what they do, by the way. When they do this kind of ranking system, someone has to be at the bottom. Like, that's just how the system works. If there's 5 spots, there has to be someone in each bucket. That just is what it is. And that's why it's purposely designed that way. So similarly, just like there has to be someone at the bottom, there can only be someone at the top or a very narrow amount of people at the top. So imagine then, for example, that there's only 2 spots available for the highest evaluative category for a business. And now let's say, for example, that you get put on, excuse me, a team project with someone else who is a great employee, and you are both competing for that top project. And let's say you're collaborating to help a customer with something in particular. What most people are going to do is they're going to try to get an edge over that counterpart, not because they're malicious, but because that's human nature. If at the end of the day, me doing better means that I get the promotion eventually, or more importantly, I get to actually make more money, then naturally I'm going to pursue the things that are going to make those things happen. And again, I'm not saying that it's okay for unhealthy team behaviors to happen, or for someone like to steal work from someone else or take credit from someone else. Point being, if someone that other person desperately needs help, let's say they're totally flubbing it when it comes to the service that they're providing to the customer, it's in my best interest to not help that person. It's in my best interest to see them drown because it means it's going to edge me out at the top. Now, personally speaking, I know that myself and other people would have too much integrity for that even if it means making less money, at the end of the day, if it's going to make the customer happy, I'm going to help out any way I can. And that's not like a holier than thou. That's not like virtue signaling. It's just my own personal, you can call it spiritual, religious, whatever. It's like my own personal, it feels like a moral obligation But I don't fault someone who wouldn't do that. I don't fault someone who would, be a bit hesitant to jump in and help out, especially if it means, if me helping you means that I get knocked down a category, and worse, it means that I get scolded by my boss for not doing enough. So specifically what happened in this event, there was a particular employee who was given the ranking of successful. And Activision-Blizzard executives went to Brian Birmingham, this guy who is the lead developer for one of their games, and said, hey, you have too many people in this category. We need you to turn this one employee's rating from successful to developing. Now, Brian Birmingham clarified that what the issue with this was that, first of all, he genuinely didn't feel like the employee was developing. He felt like the employee was belonging to be in the successful category. More importantly, he also felt like this was wrong because they had just spent months developing their latest game. Now, if you're not familiar with the tech world, the development world, the programming world, or what have you, the software world, there's often something called tech crunch. It's when a team is working to the release of a product. And so there are late nights, there's incredible overtime. And because like the video game industry typically isn't unionized, there is a stereotype of just insane hours before the latest game gets developed. So Brian Birmingham's issue is not just about the person's category. It's that now this employee who has spent months slaving away on this game now doesn't get to reap in the benefits of said game being released. So what did he do? He stood up for his employee and he said, hey, I'm not going to do this. And what they did in return is they fired him. And I think it's pretty wild to me. I mean, I'm not surprised based on the things I've already told you about Activision-Blizzard. It reaps of just corporate stupidity. And, worst of all, you take someone who's a clearly great leader, and now you gut that team. You take away a person who's willing to go to bat for their team members. And likely what typically happens, honestly, in these situations is that those corporate executives, they find a yes man to put in that spot. So that person's number two doesn't step up and I'm going to continue with Brian's image. What actually typically happens is executives go in and they look, and they don't necessarily have these conversations with people, but they say, who can we grab from another team whose management philosophy matches ours, and put them in place of that team, which is all sorts of other issues. I mean, you bring in someone who's external to the team that the team members don't trust. They know that it's an inside man. Once again, it hurts collaboration and the team overall suffers. So what do you take away from this? Well, understand that it is okay to have a team of high performers. In fact, you should want that. The problem with this ranking system is that, say you have 10 salespeople and everyone's bringing in $1 million for the business, but one person is bringing in $999,000. You're not going to punish that one person for $1,000 less bucks. You're going to celebrate everyone. So the problem with this system is that, practically speaking, it's pretty stupid. It arbitrarily categorizes people, and it harms their development when people sometimes are just doing a great job. And the other thing I would say too is, if you have people on your team, which I've said this before, if you have people on your team that suck, it's probably your fault. I mean, really, if you have someone on your team who is a terrible employee, why did you hire them? Why aren't you doing anything about it? You don't need some annual review, which I've ranted against on the podcast a number of times. You just need to treat your people like human beings, have real conversations with them, give them real candid feedback, and celebrate your wins together. I think this kind of system implies that businesses are terrible at hiring, that they're not able to hire qualified employees, and that there's somehow something wrong with having a team of high performers. I'll also go on to say that, some of these things, it's honestly why I left wanting to work with corporate America. These things actually harm innovation and they harm agility within a business. I was reading about one company where They do this ranking system, and it is a team of high achievers. And so everyone has to rotate who's on the bottom. So the way they do this is every few years, you and a small group of other people are in the bottom group. And so, you'll have a year that you do a great job. You have the second year, you do a great job. But the third year, it's my turn to be at the bottom. So what's the point of even doing anything? And again, I get a little hesitant saying this because some people are like, we'll see your people are lazy. And it's like, no, it's human nature. Like if I know I'm getting nothing out of this, if I know that, I'm not going to make any money this year, especially as a salesperson, I don't have a lot of incentive to go the extra mile. So if you want to see your business grow, find ways for everyone to be successful. Give people opportunities to actually do well in their position. And stop doing the overly corporatized, silly, clunky systems that only harm innovation within your business. I'd love to know more what you guys think about this, by the way. You can let me know in the comments of the YouTube video, or you can email me, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. I wouldn't say I'm mad about this. I'm just not surprised knowing what I know about Activision-Blizzard. So again, at the end of the day, just take care of your people. Everything will be fine. So thanks you guys for listening to today's episode. We got some more exciting stuff. Got another great episode later this week. Don't forget, if you want to support the podcast, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/goodadvice. And hey, if you want to advertise your business on the show, you got to make sure you email me as well, because I'd love to talk about your business on the podcast. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. We'll have more coming to you later this week. That's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.